everybody, and welcome to the webinar for everyone in South Africa. Happy Women's Month. It is Women's Month this month, so thought I should just sneak that one in there too. So I want to start with a quick question. Have you ever been so tired that no amount of rest helped? So you've been to bed early, you've taken the weekend off, you said no to the braai, to the dinner, to whatever it was, and yet you still woke up feeling like you were walking through fog. And that was me for much longer than I'd like to admit. At the time, I called it being stressed, and I thought it would be over soon, next week, next month, just as soon as this project is done. Sound familiar? But what I was actually experiencing was burnout. And I didn't know what I was experiencing, let alone how to ask for help. And burnout, just to give a little bit of context for anyone who doesn't know what burnout is, it is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by excessive and prolonged stress. So I think those two words are really important: excessive and prolonged stress. It occurs when you feel overwhelmed, emotionally drained, and just unable to meet the constant demands. As the stress continues, you begin to lose your mojo, your motivation. Burnout reduces your productivity and it saps your energy, leaving you falling, failing, leaving you sick and tired, helpless, hopeless, cynical, and even possibly resentful. And eventually you feel like you just have nothing more to give. So, a little bit about my story. I started my career in forestry with real ambition and optimism, and I really wanted to prove myself in this industry. I was originally born up in Gauteng and brought up in Gauteng, and the idea of studying forestry and moving into the forestry industry was completely out of anyone's sort of comfort zone up there. And so I think in many levels, I felt I had to prove that I was in the right place. I love this industry. I love the people, I love the purpose, and I love the real world impact. And I've never regretted studying forestry and being in the forestry industry. But over time, I noticed that the load got heavier and heavier. There was the long hours, the demands, the time away from home, my two small children, and again, that need that I had, my own personal story, to prove myself again and again in a space that, let's be honest, hasn't always made room for women. There's obviously been great shakes and changes, and it's fabulous to see the sort of change in this webinar, but it was a very real thing at one point. So I wore this independent, high-achieving, perfectionist badge as badges of honor. And when I started to unravel, and I thought I was failing, I doubled down. I worked harder. I put more pressure on myself. More coffee, more hustle, more pretending that everything was fine. I just had to get through this week, this month, this project. And I did pretend until I couldn't anymore. Burnout didn't hit me like a wall. It crept in slowly and quietly, like erosion. I stopped laughing. I lost my creativity, and I forgot what joy even felt like. And eventually, I actually left and stepped away from forestry. Not because I didn't care, not because I wasn't enjoying my work, not because I'd lost my purpose, but because I just realized that I couldn't show up anymore because I was completely depleted myself. And this decision changed everything. Today, I'm a life coach specializing in burnout, as you all know, for those of you who've joined us on previous webinars. And my mission is simple. It's to make sure that no one else has to suffer in silence the way I did. And I think this platform is one of those really great platforms where we do get to talk about all these sorts of things. So here is what I want you to know. Burnout is not a weakness. It's not a failure. It's your body and your soul whispering, maybe even screaming, that this is not sustainable. Enough! You can't keep going on the way that you have been. And it doesn't just happen to those who can't handle it. It particularly happens to the high performers, the go-getters, the ones who say yes, who show up, and who never want to let anyone down. Does this sound familiar to anyone? We need to normalize this conversation around burnout, because when burnout stays in the dark, that is where shame thrives. But when we bring it into the light, we can begin to heal, to grow, to learn. So, coming back to the theme, and that is all about mentorship. What if we didn't just use mentorship as a means to climb the corporate ladder, but also to lighten the load? What if a mentor wasn't just someone who helped you to reach the next career goal, but was someone who gave you permission to rest along the way? The most powerful mentors I've had, the ones with the most impact, weren't the ones who dazzled me with their job titles or with their fancy offices and cars or how hard they were working, but rather they were the ones who invited me into their office, closed the door, and over a cup of coffee said, "I've been there, let's talk about it." Who asked, "How is your mental well-being?" Not just, "How is the project going?" And I think from today, we've heard great stories and advice from Nelly, Klengiwe, and Itu. And for those of you who have been part of previous She is Forestry webinars, there has been lots of other leaders who have shared their personal stories. And this to me is very encouraging. I remember particularly when I had first had my realization that I was suffering from burnout, someone came to me in the passage of our office and said to me, "Oh, come quickly into the office. We'll close the door and we can talk about what's going on." And I actually said to this person, I'm like, "No, I will talk in the passage because I actually want everyone to hear about it. I want everyone to know about it. Not because I felt like a victim or I wanted everyone to pity me, but rather because I wanted everyone to understand what was going on because I hadn't at the time, and to be able to make this sort of conversation much more normalized. So it's a normal conversation that we can have. There's nothing to be ashamed about." So, if you are a mentee, what is it that you need to hear? I'm going to invite you to ask your mentors, not just for career advice, but also ask them how they manage stress, what boundaries they've had to learn to set and how to set them, where they failed, and maybe what they would do differently. Remember, it's not a weakness or a failure to ask for help. And if you're a mentor, how can you make a change? Well, you can go deeper than just productivity tips and timelines. Share the messy middle, the truth behind your highlight reel. You have no idea how your healing honesty can be for someone who thinks that they're the only one who's struggling. And let's face it, if it wasn't for something like this She's Forestry Forum and the wonderful interaction that so many of us have had because of it, we might not be struggling together, but rather struggling in isolation, which is definitely the path to burnout. So here I'm going to give you a gentle call to reflection. So sitting where you are right now, if you can, just take 1 or 2 beautiful deep breaths into the belly, soften the jaw, soften the shoulders, and just take a moment. Whether you are leading a team, leading yourself, mentor, mentee, anyone in between or more than one of those, take a moment to reflect. And where might burnout be showing up in your story? And maybe before this talk, you didn't know what burnout was, but now you have an idea. So where might that be showing up in your story, in your life? And then get honest with yourself, like what boundaries need strengthening or what boundaries don't exist that you need to bring into place? What support have you been avoiding? So have you been having those chats with your mentor slash mentee, your sponsor, but they've all been evolving around work rather than evolving around mental health and managing stress? And then my favorite, compassion. Compassion over perfection. Remember that you are not weak for needing to rest. You are human. And you're not meant to do this alone. Earlier, I can't remember who it was, spoke about Ubuntu. And we will all be much better people if we work together rather than in isolation. So, if this hits home for you, remember that I'm always available to give you extra support. Let's keep this dialogue going, not just for this webinar, not just for this month, but every month. Because burnout shouldn't be the price of ambition. Not for you, not for anyone. Thank you very much.